guys, Clio here, and this will be my spoiler-filled review of Rhythm of War by Sanderson. I've tried to film this a few times, but it just becomes too long, so I'm hoping I'm going to be able to contain my enthusiasm for talking about this book a little bit more. But so this is a spoiler-filled review. If you want a spoiler-free review, it'll be up there. I also have a non-spoiler reading vlog for this book, which I will also put up there. But so this one will contain spoilers for Rhythm of War, for the previous books within the Stormlight archive. It will not contain spoilers for Dawnshard because I have not read Dawnshard, and it will also not dive into the Cosmere connections. They are there for you to explore if you've read this book, and I'm not going to do my conjectures or to talk about a lot of those connections within this review, because there's enough for me to talk about when it comes to these characters and the story itself to not have to dive into those. I will start off by talking about the main focus of this novel, which is supposed to be Venli and Eshonai, but I will say that I don't think that that is the case. I don't think that Venli and Eshonai were the focus of this novel. So in principle, that means that this is structurally an unsound book, because all previous entries within this book, the main focus and so the flashback sequences have really been the main focus of the book. But I feel like even Sanderson wasn't really convinced of this himself, because we only get flashback sequences from the third part onwards in this one. That is also part of the reason why I feel that they don't work, because we started with them way too late within the book. Also because we get a dual perspective, whereas Eshonai is already dead, and whereas so in our present timeline we only have Venli. So I think Eshonai's parts are kind of taking away some of the attention from Venli and making it so that we don't fully connect to Venli the way that we could have if her flashback chapters had only been about her. But apart from that, I also just think we already knew too much there. There isn't any sort of like big secret there, as we've had with previous entries in the Stormlight, that, you know, those flashback chapters were crucial to understanding the character. I feel with Venli that really wasn't the case, that we kind of already knew her journey so far, and that we didn't need to have those flashback chapters to be able to continue on. So I definitely felt like the flashback chapters for me, they were just dragging, they were tiring to read, and it was just too much deja vu as well. I felt like we had most of that story already in a retrospective sense when Eshonai was thinking about the way that things were happening in Words of Radiance. And so yeah, that really didn't work that well for me. I personally don't really mind all that much. I feel like there was so little attention paid to it that it really didn't drag the story enough for me. I know that some people have really struggled with the Parshendi part of this book, but I think I only struggled with those flashbacks just because I wasn't that intrigued, and I felt like I'd already read some of them. For some of them I really felt like, didn't I already read that? Wasn't this in an earlier book? So I did think that that was a flaw, but present day Parshendi chapters I definitely did enjoy a whole lot. And I loved having these sort of like nuanced Parshendi characters like Venli, but also like Leshwi and Reboniel. Reboniel's such a good addition to our cast, but I will get back to her when I'm talking about Navani. As I'm talking about Parshendi, let me also talk about the Pursuer, such an interesting character to add. He's not interesting in the sense that, you know, he's very much a black and white character. He's very much your typical bad guy, let's say. But he really raised stakes within his book with his presence, and he really just raised stakes in terms of the way in which battle was being waged, you know, the way in which that hand-to-hand combat was taking place there. I was really so scared for Kaladin's life at the very beginning of this book immediately. I really thought he was gonna die, like in the first 150 pages at some point. I was like, what? I definitely think that the Parshendi parts were super interesting and were very interesting in terms of the world building and also the nuance to the story, because, you know, up until this point we've kind of, you know, you've had hints of, you know, the Parshendi aren't the bad guys. We've definitely had that in the beginning of Oathbringer when Kaladin was kind of held captive by this group of Parshendi. And of course, in the chapters we've had previously from Ash and I, we've definitely learned to appreciate Parshendi culture a lot more. But I definitely love seeing this sort of like complex situations that have been developed now after the creation of the Everstorm, and you know, this complex structure of the Fuse, the Regals, the Unmade, and you know, very much a look at the way in which the Animan camp isn't all on the same page, and I just loved looking at that. I also loved how we really wanted some of these characters to turn sides, while at the same time not being completely clear on what their side actually was. So I think that that was very well established, very well handled throughout this book. My previous qualm have kind of been that Odium is very much a sort of like a Sauron villain. He's an overpowering black and white villain. There is no nuance to his character, and so I absolutely loved seeing this sort of development where we get a little bit more of these sort of bad guys who do have nuance to him, who have a sort of backstory or sort of like more to their personality to explore, and I'm gonna hope that with Todium we also have a little bit more, because at this point it kind of seems, you know, like at this point in time Todium has become kind of all evil in our eyes at the last point of this book, but I'm definitely hoping that we're gonna see some interesting stuff with Todium being Odium rather than, you know, our previous Odium. I very much hope that there's gonna be more, first of all, unpredictable things happening with there, but also that we're gonna be left hanging a little bit there in terms of like, what is his end goal, and like, is this something that is completely evil or not? You know, Taravangian has always been this character who is evil to an extent. You know, we know he is somebody who believes in the end justifies the means, and in that way he's very much opposed to Dalinar, who has these ideals and hangs on to them. But I've never been fully convinced that that makes Taravangian evil, because he is willing to make those sacrifices. Yes, he does horrific things to achieve those goals, but the goals are good, and so I cannot fully condemn him for it. And so I'm hoping that as Odium he will also have this sort of duality to him, where we can learn to understand some of the logic behind the choices that he's making, behind whatever he is going to be trying to sell to people. So yeah, I'm very interested to see that as well. But what was I talking about? Because I lost my train of thought. But so in terms of Parshendi, I think I'll just end it there, because otherwise this review is going to be as long as the previous one. I think I'm already talking for like 9 minutes at this point, so I haven't made this any shorter than I made the previous time I talked about Parshendi. So diving into the bulk of the story. So basically Brandon Sanderson considers this 3 books in one, and I would definitely say that one of them is a lot chunkier than the 2 other ones. I think least screen time in this book is definitely Dalinar. It takes us until part 3 for us to actually get a first-person perspective from Dalinar. Personally, I don't actually like Dalinar all that much, so that was fine by me. And Dalinar is interesting in this book in the sense that not a whole lot is done with the character of Dalinar. I think Brandon Sanderson has kind of like, it puts him in there because he's a main POV, but there's not really that much that was set up for Dalinar within this book in terms of growth, in terms of character development. We're kind of looking at conflict between the opposing styles that he has with Jasnah, where Jasnah is more open to sharing power, more open to a sort of open political system, whereas he is very much still hanging on to the old ways, the old honor system, and having this sort of like hero monarch figure who rules the country with strong hands. And I just found it to be very, like, Dalinar was being portrayed quite narrow-mindedly within this book, where I've previously felt like there was this aspect to him, but you know, we didn't really dive into it all that much, so I never really thought him to be that narrow-minded as I found him to be in this book from time to time. And then obviously there also that conflict with Taravangian, with the sort of like idea of the means justifies the end. But so with Dalinar, like, I find his idealism quite annoying a lot of the time, and I wish that he was a little bit more like Terravenge, and actually I sometimes wish he was more willing to let go of his high standards to kind of get where he needs to get, to kind of achieve certain things that he wants to achieve, because I think I like idealism, but I think it's quite annoying in a character. So like I really don't like Dalinar all that much. And with Dalinar in Rhythm of War, I think he really was just there to set up the next book. You know, I really think like it really felt like nothing was done with his character now, except for maybe prepare for the next installment. And with Dalinar, I gotta say, I find it quite self-absorbent, boastful, egotistical to name himself champion. Like I was like, why are you the champion? I just don't like Dalinar in general, so I don't want to see him as champion, but I'm also just kind of hoping that because he's setting himself up as champion, that is not going to be what ends up happening. Like either he's going to be prevented from being champion himself, or like he's going to realize that he might not be the best champion, or that it might be better as a way to kind of surprise Todium. And so I'm actually hoping for Shallan. I want Shallan to be the champion. Weirdly enough, I've always thought I wanted Kaladin, but I think I want Shallan to be the champion. I think we can do some interesting stuff with Shallan as the champion. Dalinar's whole deal with Odium, I don't know, like there's so many loopholes there. What some of the possibilities that I see there is like Odium winning, and so Dalinar becomes part of Todium's army, and so because Odium is restricted to this world, he will send Dalinar to the other worlds to rule the Cosmere. That's one thing. Another possibility is them trying to have the other person break the Oath Pact. That's what I'm gonna assume, that rather than try to win outright, they're gonna try to break the Oath Pact. So that's kind of my idea about where Brandon Sanderson might be going with that. Second storyline is then Shallan and Adolin in Shadesmar. I think we spend a lot of time in Shadesmar traveling, always, and I hate those traveling bits, also because I'm not a mystery thriller person. I don't care for detectives, and so this whole like figuring out who the possible spy is really didn't do much for me. And then we did spend a lot of time like getting to know the different members of that party, but then we leave them once Adolin and Shallan go into lasting integrity. So I'm hoping that just means that these characters will be popping up again in next books and will be playing a bit of a role, because otherwise, like, why are we spending so much time getting to know them a little bit better? But in terms of Shallan, Adolin, I really loved Adolin's storyline in this one. Definitely think it was a very fulfilling storyline. I've seen Daniel Green say that he didn't like the Adolin storyline because he was waiting for this sort of like culmination moment for Adolin, and that never came. But I feel like it was there, you know. For me personally, my interpretation is that it was like the way that I reacted to the whole court scene is definitely that it was an achievement for Adolin. It was because Adolin gets so much joy and so much fulfillment out of seeing others shine. He's the ideal supporting character because he is there for others and he manages to make others shine, to get others to do the right thing. And so the fact that through his support of Maya, through his belief in Maya, she was able to find the voice, to find her voice and tell her story. I thought that was so rewarding for the character of Adolin. So I have to disagree with Daniel there, because like I definitely want that to be Adolin's path going forward as well. I don't want him to have this sort of, I don't want him to kind of, like, he can have these moments here and there, but definitely don't want him to become a radiant, for example. I don't need for him to be this sort of glorious person in himself and receive the glory from others. I am perfectly fine with him being this person who supports others and is there as a sort of rock that will keep people together and that will make sure that others can fully shine. That being said, my hope since past book already, my hope has kind of been that he will reawaken Maya and that Maya and Adolin will have a bond that, like the bond that Adolin has with Gallant, with his horse. I feel like his horse is a Rhyshadium, is that how you say it? They are not unlike other horses in the sense that they really sense a bond, and so they will actively go out and defend their riders. And I am hoping that that will be the bond that Adolin will have with his sword. That his sword will kind of act the way that a Radiant sword acts, so that the sword will be able to shift shapes, that the sword will be able to become whatever Adolin needs in the moment, and that maybe even the sword will have some sort of agency the way that Nightblood has, and that is going to be what is achievable. I don't want Adolin to become a Radiant. You know, I hear a lot of people saying they hope that Adolin can kind of cure Maya and then he can then become an edge dancer, but I don't want Adolin as a Radiant. Adolin needs to stay a normal human being, and that is also just where I feel his character needs to go, because he has felt on multiple occasions that, you know, being the non-Radiant in a company of Radiants makes him feel like he's kind of useless, makes him feel like he doesn't really know what his place is in all of this. And so I feel it would be the totally wrong way to go to then just make him a Radiant. Like, what type of a message is that? You know, you can only be useful once you're a Radiant. No, he definitely needs to stay regular. He needs to stay a regular human. He cannot have Radiant powers. In speaking about Adolin, let's talk about Shallan. Shallan had I liked the Shallan parts in this one. Didn't like the whole espionage thing, as I said before. I like to see how, just like Kaladin, she is a very dark place for the majority of this book. She's basically always in hiding. We get so much Veil and Radiant screen time because Shallan is always in hiding, and she is in hiding at the same time as keeping Formless in hiding, which in hindsight is quite important. But I very much loved that whole dynamic and that whole storyline of, you know, at the very beginning when she's referring to the fact that she doesn't want to think back on her past, she doesn't want to explore those memories. You're like, what? There's more to that story? We already know that she killed her father, she killed her mother, what could be more? And so once you find out, it's like, okay, that's a pretty big deal. And I did catch on to this early. I mean, like before it was before it was revealed, I did some chapters before that have that revelation of being like, that is why Pattern doesn't have the best of memory. That's why his memory is fuzzy. It's because he doesn't have those memories. He wasn't there, and you know, that just clicked so many things into place. But I don't know whether that's an experience multiple people have had, because, you know, I'm normally not somebody who finds these links in advance with Brandon Sanderson. So I was kind of like, what? I figured something out before he's actually confirmed it? Pat on the shoulder, I guess. But maybe it's somebody that everybody figured out, and that's the reason why I figured it out. Maybe it wasn't well crafted or something like that. But maybe I should just give myself some more credit, you know, I figured it out, okay? But so I liked the Shallan parts, and I definitely think that we went an interesting route with her within this book, and I'll be very interested to see what will happen now. I'm kind of hoping, so it's interesting already that she has 2 shard blades, but so, and then hoping that she can potentially reawaken that second Spren as well, and that will have like very interesting repercussions, I guess, that she has too. And that would also make her an ideal champion, because she has the element of surprise there of having the second shard blade. Perfect. So yeah, that's what I want to see happening clearly. Moving on to Kaladin. Kaladin, it's like I've always loved the person of Kaladin. Kaladin is a very frustrating character to read from time to time, because he doesn't believe in himself the way that you believe in him. And that can be very heartbreaking at times, especially since he goes so deep into emotions at times. And especially in this book, he's just so deep and dark in his thought pattern, which is very realistic, of course, because, you know, we've seen him be dark and gloomy. We've thought he's already hit rock bottom in the past, and so we've seen him going up, down, up, down, up, down. And so for some people this might be like, ugh, are we down again? But it is realistic, you know, he's always going to struggle with those types of emotions. He's always going to struggle with, you know, not giving in to gloomy thoughts, with not always spiraling into those dark thought patterns, but it's very realistic that that is happening. And it was just so heartbreaking to read about, and then just to see all of these things accumulating. You know, at the very beginning, it's interesting how he's freezing up in battle, and battle is what's making him freeze up, and is what's making him feel so dark and gloomy. But at the same time, battle is kind of like the only moment in which he actually feels alive. So it's very similar to when Dalinar had the thrill, where it was also like he only felt really alive when he was in battle. But it's a very different emotion, because, you know, Dalinar was very much exalting in the experience, whereas Kaladin isn't necessarily exalting, but this is like the times in which he's awoken. You know, he's woken up, he's like, I cannot go into these dark thoughts at the moment, I need to be present. And so it's an interesting dynamic to look at, you know, knowing that that is the one moment in which he feels like alive, the one moment in which you as a reader also recognize the, you know, the normal Kaladin, let's say it like that. When Dalinar then dismisses it, it's really like a punch to the gut. You were like, what? Don't do that. I hated Dalinar in that moment. And I think it would have been better to have a Dalinar POV afterwards, in which he's reflecting on the way he handled that scene, because I think Dalinar really screwed up in the way that he treated that, because he's like, yeah man, I've seen you struggling for months now, like why haven't you talked to him about it in that case? And like, I think it's best for you to just step down, you know, it's no shame in that, it happens all the time. We can even like sell this as if this is a promotion, just figure out what you want to do and let me know. Like, I'm sorry, some guidance here, you're like this guy has nobody above him except for you. You are his superior. So like it's your responsibility to make sure that Kaladin finds a good new place in life, and he's just basically just saying like, whatever, I'm afraid that I cannot use you anymore, and like, I'm sorry, I've kept this off for way too long. It's the right decision, don't get me wrong, it was the right decision. He needed to dismiss him, but the way he handled that was completely wrong. But let's talk about that decision, because it was needed, you know. Kaladin was spiraling, and he was only going to spiral more, but it was also just a very smart decision on the side of Brandon Sanderson, a very interesting place to take this storyline, because basically the only place he could have gone to otherwise was to become the champion, because he was already High Marshal. What else was in his path, in his military path? In his military path, the only way forward was to become the champion. And so now he's kind of upset that storyline, and everything was open again. You know, every possibility was out there again. And I absolutely love the fact that he then becomes a sort of therapist. He kind of invents the idea of therapy, and I love that so much. I love the fact that he was kind of he didn't really want to talk about the extent of his mental problems, because he feared that people would just lock him in a dark room somewhere and throw away the key. And basically, rather than telling somebody about it, what he actually does is prevent others from being locked in a dark room and throwing away the key, which is such a Kaladin thing to do. And you know, the moment that they went into that mental health facility, I was like, yes, this is the perfect path forward. And so I'm very eager to see what's going to happen in the next book, to see him be on that path with Zets, which is another one of my favorite characters, and you know, possibly also heal him through their connection. But so yeah, it was then also of course heartbreaking again to see him finally find purpose in that, and have the possibility of him saying like, okay, he was gonna really make an effort to also open up in those sessions, and then being the time that Yurituro is attacked, and so all of that is done for, and like all of his friends, like the majority of his friends, all of a sudden also go unconscious. His like buddy in arms Teft is no longer there to help pick him up. And so yeah, that was a bit of a heartbreaking thing, but it was also such a good thing. I love the attack on Yurituro, stakes through the roof. Love that whole sequence, and I love the way in which Brandon Sanderson used this storyline to give proper due to David and Rulaine. I love David. It's one of my favorite characters now, and I want to see this character go further in next books, because it was also a bit of a disappointing character to me this time. David doesn't really have a physical disability, he has a like learning disability, I guess. Like we go back into his backstory, and it turns out that he's slow to process things. He's a little bit of a slow learner. He had like his airway constricted for a while because there was the umbilical cord was around his neck for a little while, and so probably he had a little bit of a like he has a bit of a stilted growth at that point in time. And I love that whole exploration we had in this book of David talking about how he had been afraid to speak up because up until that point he had been treated just like anybody else within Bridge 4, but if he would start to talk to people, then they would know that he was different. And so I love that whole dynamic because it's very realistic for disability, because you know like if you have an invisible disability like I do, then it's not something you tell a lot of people. It's not something that you openly talked about. First of all, because it's weird, you know, to like when are you gonna fit that into a conversation? By the way, I'm disabled. Yeah, you cannot see, but basically I have this or that. It feels like you're kind of selling your disability as being like, hey guys, I'm disabled, feel sorry for me or whatever, even though you just really don't need to feel sorry for me, by the way. But so there is that aspect to it, but also especially when I was growing up, there was really this sort of feeling like I want to be like everybody else. I want to be normal. I don't want to talk about my disability. I want to be able to go through life and not have people realize that I have this disability. So I think it's very realistic to have that happen, and so I loved representation for David. I loved how he has been this character who's constantly being overlooked within the Stormlight, but through this book he is such a central character. He has been reached out to by the sibling, and he is very much crucial in the attack on Ureturu and crucial in the support system for Kaladin within this book, but this did not go as I wanted it to go. I was very conflicted with the character of David. Personally, I wanted the sibling to bond David, but I also wanted the sibling to bond him without this healing David, because he doesn't need to be healed. And that's kind of the problem that Brandon Sanderson has set up here with this whole physical disability system, because that would kind of mean that he was automatically going to be healed. Also, it is literally said that the sibling has said that if he bonds his friend, that she believes that he will be healed because it happened after his birth. What a stupid system. I really cannot get behind that system. It is part of who he is, okay? And he doesn't need to be healed. He needs to come to terms with the fact that it is okay to need a little bit more time to understand things. He needs to understand that he needs people around him who will be supportive of that. So I wanted him to bond the sibling because I thought that that worked perfectly with the sense that the sibling had reached out to David and to like somebody who was in that mental health facility. So she had been reaching out to kind of the outcasts of our in the tower for help, and so I thought it was gonna be a perfect apotheosis, a perfect climax to David's storyline to have him be bonded to the sibling, and it would have also been very interesting to see him bonded to the sibling and to see him become this crucial character to the tower. We didn't end up going there, and so while I was like, okay, it didn't happen the way I wanted it to happen, I also feel like Brandon Sanderson kind of neglected him in the final scene, because in the final, like in that final climax sequence in the tower, basically I was just waiting for him to bond the sibling, and he was just like, wait, where is he? Well, he needs to get to the sibling. What's happening here? But then also we only see him reappear at the very end as he's trying to pull this kid into safety, and I was just kind of hoping for a sort of like hero moment there where he would kind of protect his kid, maybe even die in the process of protecting this kid, and it's just Kaladin who saves this kid, and I'm like, no, don't steal David's moment, don't steal his hero moments. So yeah, I think Brandon Sanderson kind of did him dirty a little bit there, but I'm hoping for more progression with David from here on out. I'm hoping that we will probably see him bond his friend. It's hinted at this book, so it's probably gonna happen. But yeah, I don't want to see him healed. I want to see him bond his friend and accept and have this sort of like cool dynamic with his friend, in which his friend is like a supportive this kind of supportive framework that will help him process things a little bit more quickly, or help him process things a little bit more easily, and like be his sort of like learning aid, to say it like that. And Relaine, I really loved also looking into him a little bit more, because we have had a little bit more Relaine time in the past, but yeah, I just loved how he's always been this sort of like outcast character who didn't really fit in with either society, and how it's now like perfectly placed within this isolated environment where both parties are present, and where he has to kind of figure out how to maneuver that space, and where he has the possibility to really turn his story around. And so I really loved looking at Relaine as well in this book. I'm very happy to see that he's also going to be sticking around, because why are all these Bridgeford people moving? On that note, Rock moving at the very beginning of this book definitely means that he's getting a sort of like edge dancer novella, I guess, because, you know, how else are we going to integrate that story? Maybe like in interludes, or maybe having him become a main POV within the next Stormlight Archive book. Of course, he is like going back to the perpendicular, how do you call it? he's close to the gap within worlds, let's call it like that. So he could, of course, hop to Shadesmar and then maybe to other Cosmere worlds. So maybe he can easily be integrated into the bulk of the main story as well. But I'm expecting for there to be a sort of novella for Rock. I've also seen something already about it, but it didn't look like an official source, and I will say that I also didn't look into it, so maybe it's already confirmed at this point. Okay, then I think the only thing that still remains for me to discuss is Navani. So I've left her until the end, but I definitely think that she steals this book. This is definitely Navani's book. It should have been Navani as the main focus. Possibly this wasn't possible because we already have so much Navani, so there was already so much to delve into with Navani here, that if he would have made her the flashback character as well, that it would basically have been a book that's like 70% Navani and 30% somebody else. But she stole it. It's her book. I was quite indifferent about Navani up until this point, and now I think she's kick-ass. Do I love her as a Radiant? No, I definitely was not rooting for her as a Radiant, as you could have guessed from the previous parts, but also just because I feel like too many of the key players are Radiants. As I said previously, I want Adolin to never become a Radiant, and I actually also wanted that to be the case for Navani. We already had Jasna and Dalinar, who are kings and queens, who are Radiant. I wanted Navani to stay regular, normal, however we need to call it, non-Radiant. But I mean, I will get around to that. I will be able to change my mind there. It's fine that she's a Radiant now, and it does create some potential interesting dynamics for the future. But I very much just love that whole journey we went on, from going to that prologue in which we are very much seeing how basically Navani is ruling the kingdom at the beginning, getting zero credit. Everybody, the reader included, up until that point had really assumed that Gavilar was very much ruling the kingdom, very much the king, very much in charge of things. And in that prologue we're very much seeing how Gavilar has kind of become too much centered on other things, that he is neglecting the kingdom himself, and how Navani is picking up the slack. And just realizing how then in those years afterwards, when her son has been taking over, she has definitely also been at the center of politics, but has always remained in the shadows. And so seeing her throughout this book then really being forced to stand on her own, and really seeing her explore a side to herself that she has always wanted to, but has never had the time or has never really prioritized, was just so rewarding. I really loved the whole scientific exploration that we did with her, and it was just so interesting as well. But I really love that dynamic with Reboniel, and the way in which, you know, it's very much a battle of wits, with them both trying to outmaneuver one another and trying to one-up each other. And I love that whole dynamic. I will also be talking a little bit more about Reboniel within this one, because I definitely think she's a very interesting enemy, in the sense that I think a lot of times when we are looking at the enemy when it comes to science, we are either looking at a sort of a sort of like evil scientist who pushes the boundaries of what is ethical within scientific exploration, or it's somebody who doesn't care about the process of coming to a scientific discovery, who only cares about the result and what can be achieved with the result. Whereas Ribonial is somebody who is very much interested in the process, who's very much intrigued about scientific discovery in and of itself, not necessarily about results it can create. She is interested in the results, of course, as well, but she is very much somebody who roots for discovery and who is very much respectful of the way in which humans are able to have these technological scientific evolution throughout time, where she feels like her society is a lot more stilted, a lot more stuck in their old ways, a lot more working from sort of sense that everything has already been discovered and that you know, nothing new can be found. And so I very think she's a super interesting villain, and also just the mystery surrounding what is her motivation, what is she trying to achieve, was just so well done. But that whole exploration together with Navani, that whole sort of suspenseful push and pull between the two of them just worked so well, and the way in which they you know, they're having this battle of wits while at the same time also working together to kind of work through their scientific problems, to work through parts in which they are stuck in their exploration. And it just worked so well, and it was just such a nice, beautiful end scene between the two of them as well. And that whole idea of them having made this book together, having made Rhythm of War together, is just so beautiful. But also in the other way, but also if you look at Navani, for example, having kind of learned the rhythms throughout this book, not perfectly, of course, and not all of them, but how she is basically kind of learning the listener's language throughout this book, is just a beautiful way, it was just a beautiful element to this story. And I hope that that is kind of there as a sort of setup for having her be the person who's going to unite the different sides, who's going to end this conflict eventually. In terms of the scientific exploration, interesting. It was also very interesting to go back. But so on page 844, where he's adding all of these glyphs in there, where he's saying that the glyph for Roshar is a combination of the glyph for Stormlight, for Koravaris Light, and for Raisin's Light. So basically here he is saying that the glyph for Roshar is a combination of Stormlight, Void Light and Life Light. Is just using different words for it. It's just like, it's such a typical one. When I saw that, I was like, what? He already gave this away earlier within this book. But so yeah, that I think is a typical, I very much think that Brandon Sanderson chuckled when he put that illustration in there at that point. But so I love that whole thing. I love the whole idea of having these three gods each have their light, and then having the possibility of combining different light sources together to form a new light, with then the idea of the anti-light. So will these combined lights also have an anti-combined light? They should have. Like, it just opens up the universe, and it's such a typical Brandon Sanderson thing to do, where you're presented to this magic system at the beginning, you know, which is often like a rudimentary, quite easy magic system to get into. I think Stormlight Archive was kind of the more difficult ones, in the sense that there were just so many different searches, and so which felt kind of like separate magic powers. And so that it was maybe already a little bit more of a difficult magic system to get into from the beginning. But then, like in typical Brandon Sanderson way, he will be exploring evolution within those powers and different ways of using those powers throughout, and he's really opened up this universe by this. What is it going to what is like the effect going to be if a Radiant tries to use, you know, some of these like tower light, for example? Is that a possibility, and things like that. So it's just opening up so many doors, so many interesting possibilities, that I'm just like, okay, good move, good move. I'm just so eager to see what is going to happen with all of that, and the way in which we're going to be expanding this magic system throughout. But so I think that that is more or less what I wanted to talk about in this spoiler-filled review. I'm trying to figure out whether there's something that I'm like completely overlooking now. Wit. I'm completely overlooking wit. First of all, Wit was weird in this book because he's so much more involved, making Wit really a guiding figure in here. I thought it was very interesting to have him form a sort of like relationship with Jasna, and like the way in which we get asexuality representation for Jasna. Love that. But you know, I wasn't fully sold on the fact that Wit has always been this sort of elusive character who just pops up where he's needed, and all of a sudden he's just there at Jasna's beck and call the entire time. But yeah, it makes kind of sense in the sense that they have a sort of like relationship together. I loved his spren, I loved design, and I thought that that was just like a perfect match between Wit and design. I just thought it worked so well. I really want to see these characters more. But the epilogue, I mean, that was just such a good way to get me hyped for the next book. Because Wit has always been this sort of like elusive character that you don't fully understand, and nobody fully understands, but everybody is aware that he's kind of central and that he knows so much more and that he has a sort of big plan probably. And then to have him lose his memories, I am down for it. I absolutely want to see what the implications are gonna be. I think personally that there's gonna have to be a sort of like rescue situation where they have to kind of rescue Wit's memories, because I'm going to assume that that is using a sort of magic system from another Cosmere book, but as I said, I wasn't going to go into the other Cosmere works within this, but I definitely think that that is going to be, that is kind of how the memory system works for Wit, and that is basically means that they need to recover those memories and get them back to Wit. But yeah, I think there are some interesting things that are going to happen there. In any case, it was always interesting because Wit has always had the Cosmere as a whole in mind rather than Roshar itself, and so possibly with him no longer being there to nudge people in a certain direction, it's gonna have major impact on the Cosmere as a whole. So maybe. But so yeah, I think we got a lot of nice, interesting like elements of mystery included there at the end to keep us going for the next one, which we now have to wait for. But so overall, I really love this book. I think it has, like, objectively speaking, it has quite a bit of flaws, you know, depending on what you're expecting. You know, it's not a well-balanced book in terms of the 3 different main POVs, but none of the books so far have really balanced them out perfectly. I think the first book has come the closest to balancing them out, but even there, Shalom didn't have as much screen time as the others. But in terms of a lack of balance between the 3 characters, I definitely think that probably this one is the most out of balance. It's just out of balance in favor of the characters that I personally enjoy more. I think it has its structural problems in the sense that we expect the main focus to be on Venli and Eshonai, because that is what Brandon Sanderson has always done up until now. His flashback characters have always been the main focus of the books, and if it was his intention to have that be the main focus here, then he failed at that. But as a reader, I don't necessarily consider it a flaw, you know, that those flashback characters aren't the main focus of this story as a whole. I didn't feel that way. I do think that the flashback chapters shouldn't have been there, but it also didn't fully bother me. It slowed down my pace a little bit when I got to a flashback chapter, but overall I was still making my way through this book at a pretty good speed regardless, so I'm still giving it a 5-star. Is it a 5-star? Like, it is so much better than the majority of fantasies that I read. It is definitely up to the level where I feel a 5-star read needs to be. But yeah, there's always flaws to be found within a book. So it is the case of, it is one of those cases where I give a book a 5-star rating because regardless of its flaws, I love it. This is one of those reads. So it's not an objective 5-star, but it is a 5-star in my book. regardless. So hope you guys enjoyed this review. I don't know how long it's going to turn out to be because I think I had to reset the camera quite a few times. So I hope it still had some structure to it as well, because I basically was just talking on and just like coming up with what I wanted to say as I was going along. But definitely let me know down below if you want to talk about something else that I didn't discuss. I know that I didn't go into everything. For example, I didn't talk about moage, I think, within this review, for example. I didn't maybe even talk about the pursuer, don't even know anymore at this point. So, you know, those elements we can go further into down in the comments below. Feel free, this is a spoiler-filled review. You can give as many spoilers as you want in the comments to this video. So we'll be very interested to talk about them with you guys down below. So see you guys for the next one. Bye!